Terrifying artillery bombardments, suffocating poisonous gas, mindless mass attacks, and of course, trenches. Muddy, waterlogged, rat-infested trenches where millions of men suffered, bled, and died. This is what characterized World War I on the Western Front. The Allied armies faced off against Germany on the fields of France and Belgium, and by December 1914, the trench warfare stalemate had set in. It would persist until near the end of the war in 1918. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. From October 1911 to May 1915, Winston Churchill was the first Lord of the Admiralty. It's a cabinet position. And as the First Lord, he was the political head of the British Royal Navy and the government's senior advisor on all naval affairs, and he was responsible for the direction and the control of the Navy. So it was a very powerful position. Brilliant, ambitious, and pugnacious, he did a great deal to ensure that the Navy was in a state to fight a war. He put a strong emphasis on modernization, and he was an early supporter of using planes in combat. And quite frankly, Churchill was a fighter. He liked to fight. And during World War I and later during World War II, those were times that he found to be very invigorating and really tapping into some of the greatest skills and abilities that he had. Now, in an attempt to circumvent the deadlock in France and create a shift in the dynamic of the war, Churchill advocated for an attack against the Ottoman Empire, an ally of Germany, in the Dardanelles. The Dardanelles is a narrow strait that forms part of the continental boundary between Europe and Asia. So if you look on the map and you're thinking of where modern-day Turkey is right now, in that Mediterranean area, that's really the area that we're talking about. The plan was to launch a naval attack followed by an amphibious landing on the Gallipoli Peninsula. And the goal was to capture the Ottoman capital of Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. The campaign was launched in February 1915. It was a miserable failure. The naval attack was repelled, and after 8 months fighting, the land campaign was abandoned and the invasion force was withdrawn. In all, some 480,000 Allied forces took part in the Gallipoli campaign at a cost of more than 250,000 casualties, including some 46,000 dead. It was a humiliating defeat for the Allies and for the sponsors of the plan, especially Winston Churchill. He paid the political price for his failure, and in May 1915, he was demoted from his position as the First Lord of the Admiralty. Failure is a part of life. And as you lead your construction company at one time or another, you may have to demote someone because of their failures. Demotion is more difficult than firing someone. It requires understanding and skill on your part to support the demoted person and ensure that they're able to positively impact your company moving forward. In today's episode of Construction Genius, episode 23, we're going to cover 3 things. Number one, why people get demoted. Number two, the emotional cost or impact of demotion. And number three, how to help someone who has been demoted recover and make a contribution to your company. So let's take a look. Why does someone get demoted? There's three things that I'm going to dive into here. The first one is incompetence. The second one is poor decisions. And then the third is a lack of compatibility. Let's start off with incompetence. And what I mean by incompetence is lacking the qualities needed for effective action. So in order to act effectively, the first thing you need is skill. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. There's a baseball player named Mac Williamson, and he was a longtime member of the San Francisco Giants organization. And if you know anything about the structure of a baseball organization, they have different levels at which different players participate in. So they have single A, double A, triple A, and then they have the major league level. And obviously the major league level is the highest level. And it's the goal of every baseball player to participate in the major leagues. Mac Williamson is a classic example of what's known as a 4A player. In AAA, he absolutely killed it, hitting home runs, hitting for power, and just doing really well. But when he was promoted up into the major leagues, though he had flashes of that AAA performance, he was never able to consistently perform at a high level in the major leagues. He lacked the skill to be consistent. He was too good for AAA, but not good enough for the major leagues. And as a result of that, he was demoted down into AAA and eventually left the San Francisco Giants organization. Now think about this in your organization. You might have someone who's a great project manager. And you think, I'm going to promote this person into a project executive role. And that promotion requires them to shift from focusing on building a project more into the role of building up people. Because I'm assuming as a project executive, they're going to have project managers reporting to them. Some people lack the skill to make that shift. And really, they're more happy running their own projects than expressing those leadership skills of building people up. So a lack of skill can lead to a need to demote someone. Another reason why someone is incompetent or they lack those qualities for effective action is because of their temperament. Do you know who Silvio Dante is? Silvio is Tony Soprano's consigliere. In other words, his second in command on the classic TV show, The Sopranos, one of my all-time favorite shows. Actually, I think it is my favorite show. Now, in one episode, Tony gets shot by his uncle, and he's in a coma in hospital. And because of that, Silvio has to step up into the role of being acting boss. And so in this episode, you have scene after scene of various mafia members coming to him, asking him for decisions and asking him to arbitrate between their conflicts. He's in that leadership role. And when he first steps into it, you see these scenes of him speaking with his wife and both of them kind of thinking, yeah, this sounds good. And I think it's my time. And maybe I'll step up into this role. And God forbid, if Tony does die, maybe I'll become the actual boss and not just the acting boss. But what's interesting is that Silvio did not have the temperament for that peak position of acting boss. And he himself, because of the stress of that role, ends up in hospital having some kind of panic attack. Now, Tony Soprano, he recovers and becomes, steps back into his role of being the boss. And Silvio is more than happy to step back into that second-in-command role of consigliere. And that's really the reality of some folks, is that they don't have the temperament necessary for certain positions. And so it becomes necessary to demote them into a lower role where perhaps they're more compatible in terms of the way that they show up on a daily basis. So people are incompetent because they lack skill, and sometimes because they lack the temperament for a position, and that may lead to having them be demoted. Second reason why someone gets demoted is because of their poor decisions. Leadership and success and effectiveness is all about the quality of the decisions that you make. And as you know, and as I know, we all make mistakes. Now, the reason we make mistakes can be because of our arrogance, because of our imprudence, our impulsivity. Perhaps we lack information. Perhaps we just have some bad judgment in that particular situation. I know a banking executive who had a brilliant career for many years, and then one day he made a decision to loan a considerable amount of money to an individual who ran a business, and the loan was a failure. The individual could not pay back the money. He made a poor decision, and as a result of that decision, he was demoted. So poor decisions are a reason why people get demoted. And then the third reason is incompatibility. So you might have someone who has the necessary skill and temperament. They may be good at making decisions, but perhaps you put them on the wrong team. And as a result of that, there are clashes and a lack of effectiveness and a general incompatibility, and you have to remove that person from the position. So those are three reasons why people get demoted. They get demoted because of incompetence, because of poor decisions, or perhaps because of a lack of compatibility. So what you need to ask yourself is, do you have anyone in your organization that needs to be demoted? Or are you thinking about promoting someone and setting them up for demotion because they lack judgment, or they're incompetent, or perhaps they are incompatible with the role that you have set out for them? Let's look at the second area now, the emotional cost of demotion. In the midst of his demotion, Churchill said, "I feel like a wounded man. I know I am hurt, but as yet I cannot tell how badly. Later on, I shall know the extent to which I am damaged, but now I only feel shock." Demotion is devastating for most people. And if you're going to help someone eventually recover from demotion, you have to understand what they're going through emotionally. Now, this can be challenging in construction many times because construction guys and gals are they're tough people, many of them. They're A-types, they're driven, it's a success-orientated industry. We very much keep track and keep score in construction. And people are trained or conditioned to have this tough outer exterior. But you know and I know that the toughest person on the outside often is just a crying child on the inside. So let's think about this emotional cost of demotion. There's three areas that I'd like to think about. Number one, shame. The second one is resentment. And the third one is fear. Let's think about shame. What is shame? It's the painful, self-conscious emotion that comes from comparing your actions with your standards. So all of us, we have standards for ourselves in terms of our behavior or our performance. And when we fall short of those standards, we experience shame. Going back to that banking executive I was telling you about, he viewed himself as a competent decision maker. And so when he made a bad decision and suffered that demotion, there was a great weight of shame that came with that. Shame can be expressed in the thought that I'm a failure and I am viewed as a failure. I know many years ago, I suffered through a demotion, and I couldn't help but be extremely self-conscious about how other people viewed me, and I felt ashamed as a result of that. The second emotion that people may experience as a result of being demoted is resentment. One of the ways that resentment is expressed in our thinking and in our words is, it's not my fault. Think about Churchill here for the moment. He had a great deal of responsibility for the decision to invade in the Dardanelles, but he wasn't the only one. There had to be other people involved in that decision, but he became the fall guy as a result of the failure of the military invasion. Not only do some people go through that idea of resentment with, it's not my fault, but then they think it's somebody else's fault. Going back to this demotion that I suffered, at the time, I made the connection between my demotion. I understood that my demotion occurred specifically because of one conversation I had with another individual. And for years in my mind, I blamed that person for my demotion. Now, let me just say, my demotion was appropriate. But in my mind, I blamed the other person for that demotion. And so as a result of that, I felt resentment. Resentment can be accompanied by obsessive thoughts, a sense of victimhood, an inability to move on. And as a result of that, you have to be very sensitive that when someone gets demoted, they can have that sense of resentment. And one of your jobs as a leader is to help them with that. The last emotion, see, that's the problem with talking about demotion and emotion. They're so closely tied. The last emotion is fear. I think this is a great driver of much of the dysfunction in our lives is fear. So if someone gets demoted, let's say they're a young person and they get demoted. Perhaps they're newly married. You've got a project manager, let's say, that for some reason is not performing. You demote them. And maybe they're in their early 30s, mid 30s. They're newly married. Perhaps they got a baby or a baby on the way. They've got increasing financial responsibilities. And as a result of the demotion, perhaps they're taking a hit financially. And a degree of instability has come into their lives as a result of that. And fear results from that financial hit. Or perhaps they're later in their career. Maybe they've got, 10 or 15 years left. And they think, man, will I ever be able to get back to that position that I previously held? Because if I don't, then how is that going to affect my retirement? So there's that sense of fear that comes with a demotion that is related to financial instability. Or perhaps they think, oh man, I've got demoted now, and the next step is, man, they're going to fire me. They're just kind of having, a little bit of mercy on me, or they don't have the guts to fire me, perhaps, so they're just going to demote me. And they live in fear of actually losing their job. And then they're afraid also about what other people think, how people perceive them, how their coworkers perceive them, how their friends perceive them. We all have this narrative in our minds about how our careers should go. And particularly in America, right, our careers should be ascending, and we should be getting promoted to more and more senior positions and holding those positions and making more money and receiving more esteem. And yet when the demotion happens, we fear what other people think. What will our friends think of us? What will our family think of us? What will my spouse think of me when I go home and I tell him or her I have been demoted? That sense of fear is something that can really grip people as they go through a demotion, and it can hinder their ability to perform effectively. Many other ministers before and since have been demoted or dismissed on the failure of their signature policy. Yet the pain that Churchill felt at the humiliation and his desperation to be vindicated, it just ate him up. His wife said at one point, when he left the Admiralty, he thought he was finished. I thought he would never get over the Dardanelles. I thought he would die of grief. Now, we've looked at why someone gets demoted and the emotional cost of demotion. So now let's discuss how to help someone who has been demoted recover and make a contribution to your company. This is really where the rubber is going to hit the road for you as a leader. And you've got to be willing to roll up your sleeves and dive in with the person that has been demoted. Because I'm going to assume that if you've demoted them, it's because you think they have a contribution still to play in your organization. And so therefore, you need to help them. And there's 3 ways you can help them. Number 1, set clear expectations. Number 2, help them with their mindset. Help them get their mind right. And then number 3, meet regularly with them to evaluate, critique, and recognize them. Let's talk about setting clear expectations. Again, if you've demoted someone instead of firing them, it should be because you want or need them to stay within the organization. And you've got to understand, as they're going through that demotion, they are in a muddle. So don't leave them hanging. Don't just say, hey, you're no longer in this position. You're now in this other lower position and hope for the best. You need to meet with them and you need to reassure them. And the way you do that is by being crystal clear about their new role and the responsibilities that come with that role. Even if they've been in that position before, you need to sit down with them and paint a clear picture of what success looks like in that role. You also need to be able to show them how that role is going to play within the bigger picture of the organization. And this is particularly important for project managers who have to share resources and don't have complete control over everything that affects their projects. And as you're sitting down with them, don't give them false promises. Don't say, hey, if you do well here for 6 months, then this will happen, because you're not sure that's going to happen. Don't give promises that you can't keep. But just be crystal clear with them on their roles and responsibility and your expectations. Now, the second thing you need to do in order to help someone recover is you got to help them with their mindset. And this is where you must put yourself in the role of a coach. A lot of your responsibility as a leader is to be an effective coach. And much of the coaching work I do with my clients is about their mindset or the way that they think. And the reason why is because there is a direct link between the way we think and the way we behave. And the way we behave leads to the outcomes that we get. So mindset, action, and outcome are closely linked. And if you want them to have successful outcomes, you need them to have the right mindset so that they execute the correct actions to lead to those outcomes. Now, the first thing you can do is to sit down with them and encourage them to begin a new story. In other words, you don't want them to be defined by the demotion. You don't want them walking around the office as the guy or the gal who used to be in this position. You need to encourage them to focus on recovery and writing a new chapter of their history, and to establish a new narrative by focusing on positive forward actions. So one of the ways you can help them with starting a new story is to sit down with them and ask them to cast themselves forward to the day of their retirement. Their career is going to come to an end. Ask them, how do you want to be remembered? This vision of a legacy can help them accept their demotion as a temporary failure and enable them to drive towards creating that new story and achieving that vision of how they want to be remembered. The next thing you can do is to encourage them to embrace the pain. Many times in our lives, pain is as a consequence of our decisions. And that pain needs to be embraced as a signpost to where we need to improve. Allow them to sit with their pain and encourage them to sit with their pain, but tell them to use that pain as a signpost to where they need to go in order to improve their performance. The next thing you can tell them to do, and this is a tough one, is to be grateful. It's a deep challenge. When things go wrong in our lives, it's so easy to go towards resentment and bitterness and to be self-pitying. But I know for me, particularly when I went through the demotion that I did, one of the ways that I was able to come out of that difficult time was to be thankful for the situation that I was in. It really helped me to overcome my bitterness. It helped me to overcome my shame. I was thankful because I understood that that demotion was because of my behavior and that my behavior needed to change. So counsel them and coach them on gratitude. And it sounds kind of crazy, right? But sometimes it's those most difficult things in our lives that as we embrace them and as we're thankful for them, that can create a real positive energy and momentum that brings us forward into new vistas of behavior. Then ask them, what is your unique contribution? Okay, they're probably very focused on their failure when they've been demoted. But again, I'm assuming that because they're still in your organization, you think that they have a contribution to make. So ask them, what is your unique contribution? Where are you strong? What can you bring to the table that others can't? What contribution do you have to make, particularly in view of your future vision of your legacy and how you want to be remembered? What is it that's unique about you? And then the final way that you can help them with their mindset is simply to give them a little bit of tough love, to confront them kindly if you see them wallowing in self-pity or in recrimination or in self-justification. Just tell them this: get your eyes off yourself and start thinking about the contribution you have to make to the organization. Tough love is appropriate. And it's only by getting their eyes off of themselves and focusing on the contribution to the greater benefit of the organization. As they do that, they'll be able to move forward from the demotion and focus on the contribution that they have to make. So this is kind of a tough thing that I'm encouraging you to do, this coaching aspect. But it's a critical part of your role as a leader, is to coach people through the difficult times in their lives. So after you've set clear expectations and worked with them on their mindset, the temptation can be just to move on. Don't make that mistake. Don't just, meet with them once or twice and hope for the best. Instead, commit to meeting regularly with them to evaluate, critique, and recognize them. My recommendation is someone who's been demoted, if they're directly reporting to you, you should meet with them weekly. If they're indirectly reporting to you, then you should be checking in with them bi-weekly to monthly. And when you meet with your direct reports, you should evaluate and critique them in those meetings based on objective numbers and subjective feedback that is linked to their role and responsibility, particularly if you've identified a specific skill or behavior that has caused them to be demoted. So for instance, if you've demoted someone because they are unable to hold someone accountable, then work with them on that skill of accountability. And then as you're meeting with them and you're seeing some improvement, make sure that you are recognizing them. Specific recognition can reassure someone who's been demoted that they're on the right track. Again, you don't want to butter them up unnecessarily. You don't want to blow smoke up their butts or anything like that, but you do want to appropriately recognize them. Now, I know the objection to all of this is, hey, suck it up, right? Life is tough. You've got demoted. Stop complaining and move on. And to an extent, you're correct. But think of the investment that you've made in that person and the commitment they've made to the company, even if perhaps in the role that they were demoted from, they weren't a success. Understand that demotion has a deep impact. And one of your jobs as a leader in your construction company is to help others through those periods of demotion so that they can achieve success on the other side. So let's go back to Churchill here as we wrap up. Despite admitting that he was finished, the future prime minister did not slide into mediocrity. He resigned from the government in October 1915. In November, Churchill joined the 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards on the Western Front. In other words, he went from the cabinet office to the front lines, to the trenches. In January 1916, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and placed in command of the 6th Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers. And Churchill spent 3.5 months at the front. His battalion faced continual shelling, and though the front line was undoubtedly one of the low points of Churchill's career, he made a fine officer. He led from the front, he showed physical bravery, and displayed a genuine concern for his men, regularly visiting their trenches on the edge of no man's land. In May, he returned to England and continued to make a contribution as a member of Parliament. And in 1917, he was appointed Minister for Munitions, and in 1919, he became the Secretary of War. Gallipoli was by no means the last failure of Churchill's career, and he experienced many ups and downs through his life, as we all do. But ultimately, he was not defined by his failures or his demotions. In fact, one of his most famous quotes is, "Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm." In this episode, we've covered 3 things: why people get demoted, the emotional cost of demotion, and how to help someone who has been demoted recover and make a contribution to your company. As a next step, if you need to help someone recover, or even if you'd like to get people to have a clear perspective on the contribution that they have to make to your organization, download the leadership dashboard that I have on my website. It's a coaching tool, and it's vital that you help people through the challenges in their careers through coaching them. And the Construction Leaders Dashboard is one of the simplest and yet most powerful tools that I use with all of my clients. And you can take it, you can fill it out for yourself, and you can have other people in your organization fill it out. As you go through the dashboard, it'll help you and the people that you work with define their mission, their vision, their values, their performance metrics, the key initiatives they need to focus on, the relationships they need to work on, and their own development opportunities. You can use the Leaders Dashboard as a tool when you're coaching people through their demotions and moving them on to greater success. So you can go to my website and you can download that at ericanderton.com/C as in cat, L as in Larry, D as in dog. I'll have the link in the show notes, and use that as a coaching tool for people that you're working with. My name's Eric Anderton. Thank you for listening to this podcast today. Feel free to leave a review, give me some feedback. And if you have issues with folks that have been demoted, make sure that you're committed to helping them through those. You know how tough that can be. You know how difficult it is. But it also can be a wonderful opportunity to really gain some ground in people's lives and move them forward to greater success in your organization. So thanks for listening today.